Welcome back to another episode of AI FYI. Today is my birthday, and Andy and Joe sent me a whole amazing cake. Joe's got an exciting episode planned for us today. Today, we want to know, would you trust AI to fight a war?
And happy birthday, Kieran.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be talking about AI and autonomous warfare, which is probably one of our darker topics. I don't know why, but it interests me. And you may ask, why talk about this? Isn't this a podcast about how AI exists in my life and affects me? For some, AI and warfare might actually be a reality for some of our listeners. We're going to talk more about how it exists on the modern battlefield. For many, it's not a reality, and I hope that it never will be. But if you want to know how AI is used in the world, it's almost like an inevitability that it will be used as a weapon. So in my research, I looked back at some history. Like the bayonet was first used for hunting boar. Barbed wire was first used for keeping cattle in. Locomotives, not invented for war, but were pivotal in the Civil War, American Civil War. The telegraph shaped World War One. Andy, you're not going to like this, but apparently modern day tanks borrow a lot of designs from the American tractor. And then just like as a modern day example, in Ukraine, startups that were focused on agricultural drones for like looking at crops and stuff some of them shifted to surveillance drones after the war in Ukraine started. So all technology seems to end up in weapons because I think there's this idea in war that if it works, then use it. And there are some safeguards to that we'll get into.
Sad but unsurprising. If you think your life is at risk, of course you'll use any tool available to save yourself. And agriculture and access to food is a big part of war, actually. It's one of the ways we militarize everything. If you can starve an army, that's a really effective technique, actually.
So a lot of my research, it came from this book that I read in 2018. It's called Army of None by Paul Scher. And I actually think this may be the reason I'm like sort of interested in this topic is because I just read about it a while ago, and the book was very dense and talks specifically about like particular weapons, but then also just like the philosophy of war and like the future of AI. And I think it has like a really clever title, Army of None. I'm a big reader of Wired magazine, which I think I've talked about here, and they've had some good coverage of like the war in Ukraine that I referred back to. So I was sort of thinking like what might be most interesting to our listeners, and I think probably what they want to know is like how scary is it, or how bad or how controlled it is. And one thing that might be of some comfort is that like fully autonomous weapons aren't very common. And humans are still very much in the loop. And there's this idea of human in the loop in AI. Does one of you want to talk about what that means at a high level?
Basic concept of human in the loop is we have these machines, a bunch of AI, different types of AI that might be carrying out various tasks. So whether that's identifying objects and images or translating speech, there are often times when the machine is going to get it wrong. And by having a human in the loop, so humans, like physical people, part of this AI detection, inference, training cycle, are going to, interfere or intervene to correct the machine when it's doing something wrong. So, for example, a basic human in the loop example is you might have an object detection algorithm, which is using computer vision to identify, say, types of plants, right? And so there's actually a lot of apps out there that you can download for free, and you can like point it at a plant, and it'll tell you what kind of plant it is. But sometimes it might get the plant wrong. So they have mechanisms for the human or the user to, correct the machine and say, this is not a ficus, this is a pine tree, right? And so that feedback is going to go back to improving the algorithm so that next time it sees a similar image, it actually is able to correctly categorize that. So that's the basic human in the loop concept. Now talking about warfare is a little scarier, but yeah, I think we'll get into that.
And what the example that Kieran gave shows how a person can look at an incorrect prediction from an AI model and then correct it. If you've ever used Mint and like recategorized one of your transactions, you've actually done this. You've all done this. If you've ever tagged a face in Facebook, you've done this. But the other thing is some types of models can give what's called a confidence score. So they can actually tell you, like, I think this is a ficus, but I'm only 70% confident or 20% confident. So it's a common practice that you set something called a threshold and you say, we only trust the AI if it's at least this percent confident, like 50% confident. And we fall back to a human doing the work if the AI cannot reach that certain level of confidence.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So this idea of human in the loop seems to be really important for weapons in particular, because it's one way we can assess like how controlled they are, or how effective, or how bad they're going to be. And we sort of have to do a little work to define what autonomy means in like autonomous weapon. And you can sort of define it by two axes. And these are what is its intelligence, and then what is its freedom. And that human in the loop idea comes into its freedom. So the examples that y'all were talking about were sort of human in the loop in like a training scenario as you're developing AI or machine learning. But there's also human in the loop being used in like real time, or in the actual use or like production stage of the weapons themselves, real time when they're operating. So intelligence versus freedom. Let's break down like autonomy. There's this idea of semi-autonomous. Basically, the machine has some intelligence and can make a decision, but it needs permission to proceed. So if there's a weapon, it can't really pull its own trigger. It just needs to say, hey, I've maybe got a target here. I'm ready to go.
Wait,
And then
is that real? There are AI target like weapons that will automatically target and try to pull and then just ask for permission?
Yes.
Oh my god. Okay.
Are these like in drones, or like what kind of weapons are these?
Drones, yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, and I think like a drone is a good example. Basically, it says I'm ready to go, but I need confirmation to be able to, make the hit. And it is crazy, but this is also how like human powered weapons work as well. You might need permission to fire by someone who's found the target. So this is, I would say, the most safe like autonomy. There's also this idea of supervised autonomous weapons, and these are weapons that actually have the power to sort of target and hit the trigger, but they're being watched by a human and can be stopped or interrupted at any time. And so they don't need permission to proceed, but they are being like watched and surveyed. And we'll talk about how that's actually maybe not very effective.
Yeah, and actually, an example of this in the real world, which is not necessarily to do with AI, but I think the importance of humans being the ones making the final decision is something that I've heard in the past in World War II. So there's a Russian officer, Vasily Arkhipov, who's famously
Mm-hmm.
known for not launching the Soviet nuclear torpedo during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and saved significant disaster that would have happened in the Black Sea. So I think
And what happened there, or at least the story I heard, is his computer started telling him there was a nuke coming to like Russia or something, and he was like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, basically,
Yeah.
his superiors had given him. There was three men inside of this submarine, and two of the men. They need all three of them to confirm in order to launch the torpedo. And he was the one person that was like, "We're not launching this torpedo," and is a nuclear warhead inside of the submarine.
Mm.
Um, so it's just like so critical that humans are like sanely thinking in these situations, because it's like one misstep could literally mean, hundreds of thousands or millions of lives, which is
I,
terrifying.
I agree, but you can also, what's the opposite of this is that you might have automation that actually safeguards a weapon when it shouldn't be fired by someone who's crazy and like is reckless
Mm.
and like the opposite of empathetic. Like,
Yeah,
how
Well,
that's
can
really
you use
true.
automation to protect the wrong person from hitting the trigger?
Or the
and
person might hit the trigger and it doesn't fire, because it's like, no, you can't shoot at other people.
Right.
Like an AI gun that just
Yeah.
doesn't shoot people. That would be pretty cool.
I mean, the a civilian detector.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking almost of like laser tag. You can only hit somebody in laser tag if they're wearing the shoulder pads. If they're the employee walking through in the regular old t-shirt,
Hmm.
shooting at them doesn't do anything. And that could maybe be a better way to do wars. Opt-in kind of battle bots.
So that, hold that thought, because we're going to talk
Okay.
about like what regulation exists, and there's like a proposal along that lines that we'll be getting into. And I want to talk about the last sort of um, version of autonomy here, and that's fully autonomous. So there's really no human supervision. The machine can make judgments on targeting and then pulling the trigger. And this is the scariest version. And I think probably a good example of this is a landmine, because it is placed and then it will just, in so many words, pick its target when it's triggered by the target, and then it will go off and nobody needs to be there to control it.
Um,
So yeah.
and each landmine ever placed should be considered a crime against humanity, if you ask me. There's entire hills
Yes.
in my home country that are beautiful that can't be walked because there's still landmines from the 90s there.
Hmm.
Um, it's certainly true across parts of Southeast Asia. I think even in Africa. Shout out to whoever those people were in Thailand who trained rats to find them so they can dig them out. Or Cambodia.
Hmm.
Good work.
Yeah, and we'll talk about regulation, and there's sort of a blueprint with technology and weapons in the past, including landmines. Um, that there are a blueprint for like, how do we safeguard use of AI in weapons? And you can look back and like, just jumping ahead a little bit, there's been some success in saying like these are war crimes if you use these weapons, including landmines,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one blueprint for limiting AI. Yeah, semi-autonomous, supervised autonomous, fully autonomous. I also heard synonyms for these as human in the loop, human on the loop, and human out of the loop. I heard an interesting idea on this. It is freedom, not intelligence, that defines an autonomous weapon. So greater intelligence can be added into weapons without changing their autonomy. You can make something really smart, but where it gets really dangerous is how much freedom does it have? And that human in the loop idea is a big part of that freedom.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious how often the fully autonomous weapons are used, like now, and is that something that they're trying to get more of, or because yeah, that seems like a
Yeah.
worrisome
This
future.
this like hierarchy of how much autonomy it has is seems to be very much in play in like governments and influence groups regulating AI. Like, they'll use these tiers to say like, you like red light if this is a fully autonomous thing, if it's very intelligent and it's very free. um I'm actually not going to get super into specific weapons. The book that I read in 2018 gave a ton of examples, and they were kind of all over the place. I'm sure now, especially with like recent investment in it, there's like a ton of things we don't know about. There also seems to be a lot of examples out there of like scrappier weapons, meaning things like retrofitted and sort of unregulated to be AI weapons and aren't actually like commissioned from the government to be built by like Lockheed Martin or whatever. You know, you can take an existing like rocket and maybe like retrofit it with some AI. So probably a bad thing, but it's a little murky to me. I also think like if I went out and did more research, I could probably like tell you what maybe is the worst weapon out there, but there's all sorts of things. There's a lot of AI being used for guidance. There's a lot of defense systems, not necessarily like offensive weapons. Um, a lot of automation through sensors, so using cameras and sound to make decisions, computer vision use cases, and then also like mediums. So there's aerial weapons, there's seafaring weapons, and there's like ground defense weapons. And I say weapons, but also, like I said earlier, a lot of these are like defensive or even just surveillance. So like you might have like a surveillance drone with a ton of automation, fully automated, because it's maybe a little safer. It's not equipped with, you know, that trigger.
This is just making me think about, we talk about this all the time. AI is just a tool. The same computer vision from video from drone object detection algorithms that can identify rust on coffee plantations and, you know, improve the safety and well-being of trees and people. It's the exact same underlying algorithm as targeting from drones. And so it's really about the culture and our society more so than the technology.
Yep. We arrive back to that so often, and I think that's the case here as well for
I'm
the
also
most part.
curious, like, what's the tolerance for these systems, right? Like we see, 87% accurate in detecting, flowers on trees, or like there are these metrics that we use to quantify how good these algorithms are. Did you see any sense of that, of like, what sort of accuracy or precision they looked for when it's like, semi-autonomous or fully autonomous?
I think we could find that out. I don't know, but there are some, I guess I'll call them publications from like at least the US government on like the trying to regulate it or saying like this is um these are the rules of like building AI weapons. And that might be something that's in there. Like we require there to be like a 90% or 99% accuracy and confidence before, you know, this weapon is deployed. I don't know if it gets that granular, and it probably again depends on how like risky the weapon is in order to say that.
We, the three of us, know better than anyone how those numbers can be manipulated. Like your performance against your test set, you can just change your test set and give yourself. You can give the model the answers to the pop quiz it, and be like, it nailed it. So they could accidentally do this. So these guys, Kieran and Joel, understand when I say train test split. There are people who forget to split train test.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that means you're testing the model on the data it's already seen, so you're literally giving it the answer key on accident.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had plenty of situations like that. Figure eight.
Yeah.
It's interesting you're talking specifically about testing and evaluation because I saw some evidence that this is very much on the minds of the Department of Defense in developing AI. In fact, in 2022, February of 2022, the DoD Artificial Intelligence Organization awarded 79 vendors to streamline the procurement and delivery of test and evaluation tools. And each of these contracts were worth up to $15 million. So I think it's evidence that the government is attuned to how you build proper AI and do testing and evaluation and is investing in it, which is a good thing because it means these systems will be less buggy, presumably.
Well, it's good to hear that they're investing significant amounts of money in
Yeah.
testing and QA.
And it's interesting there's statistics on like that particular part of machine learning development. and not just like, oh, we're investing X amount of dollars in AI and in machine learning. This was specifically in like testing and evaluation tools. So just to get back a little bit more into like why human in the loop is so important, it means that weapons can be like safely interrupted, corrected, or turned off. Um, we'll talk more about this, but there have been accidents in the past where, for whatever reason, the AI was buggy. It didn't work as expected, probably due to poor training or creating it in an environment that wasn't a real like battle environment. And I also wanted to point out that like we might assume autonomy is better, and that's just not always so. There can be like a lot of value in having a weapon that's really connected to different sensors because it means it can make smarter decisions, like connected to different sensors and different like other human systems. So that's something to think about. All right, I'm going to get into a little bit of history here. So I sort of was interested in like what was the first autonomous weapon and saw a few different things. You can claim that landmines were first developed in the 1600s and they are in their own way like an autonomous weapon. But
The
then,
1600s
yeah,
for landmines?
yeah, maybe I need to look in
Wow.
that a little bit more. Like what did that look like? But yeah,
I mean, it's not terribly complicated to make a landmine. You just need to have, essentially some sort of pressure trigger, which is the same as like pulling on a trigger, but it's like instead someone's like stepping on it. And we had
The
gunpowder in the 1600s.
1600s
Yeah.
was like before the American Revolution, only 150 years after the Columbus Exchange. There was gunpowder, but there's a long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they weren't like particularly advanced landmines, but I I could see that like that's something that was being explored.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me because that means it predates the steam engine by like 200 years. Just
Yeah.
weird. Just a weird thing.
People love their explosions.
Yeah. I can see Joe frantically Google
yeah,
fact checking himself. Sorry.
We
yeah.
try to have facts on the podcast, folks,
Uh,
but we're not perfect. So, bear with us. Sometimes we get things wrong, but
And
we're
we will
okay to
put
call ourselves
corrections
that.
if we need to in the show notes.
I'm on Wikipedia. There's sort of a case to be made that there was actually something developed by the Chinese in 1277.
I mean, they did invent explosives, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And then in the Western world, yeah, at Augsburg in 1573, um, someone made like a gunpowder, yeah, triggered landmine like thing. It probably didn't look like anything more from modern life, but
Wow.
yeah. That the book I read talked about the Gatling gun, which was a precursor to like maybe more modern day machine guns. It takes 4 men to operate, but it did the job of 100 men, and it was invented specifically to like save American forces in the Civil War from less deaths on the battlefield because you didn't have to put out 100 men if you had something that could be operated by 4 men.
Hmm.
1943 was the first precision guided munition. This is interesting. Basically, it was a torpedo that left the ship. It went 400 meters out, and then it responded to acoustic noises to know where to like redirect next. And I think it went 400 meters out so that it wouldn't like redirect back to the ship that
The
fired
original.
it off.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, sort of switching from the technology itself, like a little bit of history on the regulation. I read something interesting that in 2014, the United States launched the third offensive strategy. There had been like other offensive strategies. The first one being around, let's see, some other technology. The second one being around like nuclear weapons, and then the third one being around robots, autonomy, and like human machine teaming. Um, let's see, in 2012, the DoD released official policy on autonomy and weapons. And this was, again, looking at like the level of intelligence versus freedom and then giving certain things green light, yellow light, red light, but still kind of hazy. And then I saw that again in like, well, in February 2020, there was another release that was a set of like principles in AI ethics, with guidance on like the use of these weapons or the development of them. And both 2014 publications and 2020 are available for like anyone to read externally.
So I have some questions.
Yeah.
Am I correct in assuming that like there's like, let's say, 200 and change countries on Earth, nations? Probably only like, let's call it 10 of them, 20 of them have budgets to put AI in their military.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just like the mega powers who are doing this.
Yes, and it's interesting you bring that up because there are like global level efforts to curb or regulate AI weapons along the lines of, yeah, basically what weapons count as war crimes and are AI weapons included in that. And a lot of those efforts are entirely made up by countries that don't or can't have autonomous weapons. It is not the big countries saying, let's limit these to protect human rights. It's the countries that say, like, we can't compete with these weapons in play, and so let's limit them.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other question I have. So I'm not well educated on this, but there are legal and illegal ways to commit war, which I find wild, but it's true. And like what, a couple weeks ago, South Africa charged Israel in some international court for committing a genocide against Palestine, and there were like lawyers on both sides. And I was listening to the case on NPR, like, is this or is this not a genocide? Because I guess genocides are not a legal way to do war, but if it's not a genocide, then it is legal. Unclear. And like I've heard of The Hague, right, and like these military tribunals, but I actually don't know anything about how this works, whether it's even enforced, and have those big powers started moving towards regulating AI in warfare?
I don't believe there's been any regulation of AI in warfare. Other weapons, other technologies like landmines, like chemical war,
Mm-hmm.
biological
Biochemical,
warfare,
yeah.
um, and a few others. In fact, I think I saw a number that there's like 13 official. Pepper spray, I believe, is one of them. Uh, yeah, have been made illegal. However, even though there's probably evidence that that has helped for those things to not be used in warfare, we hear news stories about things being used anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the people get pepper sprayed by the cops here all the time.
But that's not warfare. That's just
Yeah.
Eh,
crimes
isn't
against
it?
humanity.
Mm.
Yeah. Uh, okay. Yeah, that's. I have this mental model. I don't actually know if this is true. I have this mental model that we only regulate war after a big no-no happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like first we do something really bad. Somebody does something really bad, and then it's like, maybe that shouldn't happen again. So I really
Yeah.
hope we don't have that happen with AI too.
Well, I think that does sort of speak to what we were talking about earlier with like things just tend to become weapons when it's the best thing to use. And yeah, you're maybe not thinking about long term or like, is this absolutely a heinous use of technology until you've already done it?
Yeah, so there's a
Unfortunately.
whole
Yeah.
Wikipedia page on war crime, and you can go through all these different things that are illegal. I'm trying to see if they
Does
have
it?
just like a list.
But
United
like, if
Nations. Okay, so here, a willful killing, torture, or inhuman treatment, including biological experiments, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out on unlawfully and wantonly. Compelling a prisoner of war or other protected person to serve in the forces of a hostile power, willfully depriving a prisoner of war or other protected person of the rights of fair and regular trial, unlawful deportation or transfer or unlawful confinement, and taking hostages.
I thought, okay, Does it being illegal per the United Nations make any difference? Like, I thought there was this whole thing with the US putting people into Guantanamo Bay and not giving them a fair and lawful trial as prisoners of. So, like, but no one's stopping America from doing that.
Yeah, I mean, someone has to be brave enough to accuse the U.S. of these things and then enforce it. But yeah, it's like
Mm-hmm.
there's no like superior power above Earth that's like regulating these things.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, like, is that my mental model of this, Joe? Tell me if this is right. Is war has gotten more efficient. Like, it used to be like one on one, one person against one person, and then it got to like one on many, the Gatling gun, for example. And then it was like button against entire cities. Um, and we're probably at a scale now where it's even very limited people against the entire planet with the amount of nukes that are on this planet currently. So, like, and I don't think AI is going to stop that pattern. What if war becomes who just makes, like, if it becomes an engineering exercise, like future scientists and engineers of America, what company can deploy? It goes back to one-on-one battle bots.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's
maybe
talk
that
about
would be
that.
okay.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Oh
something
yeah.
that I'm kind of hopeful for in this conversation, just as I'm thinking about it, is like AI could be the thing enforcing these war crimes. AI
Yeah.
could stop people from committing these before they happen, because that could be, like the, all-seeing whatever,
Yeah.
in charge.
I love to talk about being governed by AI. And that's probably a whole nother episode. But like we are inventing something that's smarter than us, more stronger than us, and could even be
Debatably,
In certain
I
cases,
in certain
but not in
cases.
all
And
cases.
we've maybe never had anything that can we can program to control us. And maybe this is like an interesting application of that. Like, please protect us from the worst of ourselves. I
Hmm.
think that's fascinating.
But I think that's where also, we regularly come back to the people that are developing this AI have
Yeah, who
that
gets to say
power. Like they're the ones
100%?
that are instilling these values into these machines. And so now, who's regulating those people, and how do we know that and they might not even know, right? Like there could be cases where they've trained it to do something that they didn't even realize,
Yeah. But
which
we're
is,
talking
yeah.
about like go back to the good, the bad, and the buggy. You're talking about the buggy. And if you do work out the
Mhm.
bugs, it could be good.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. I'm actually like feeling a little more hopeful as I'm thinking about assuming humans ultimately are trying to do good for each other and for this world. I know there's like plenty of exceptions to that, but the mass humanity, I think this could be like a really interesting way to add safeguards to warfare and to violence.
there was this scene in Men in Black. I think it was Men in Black, where he's going through like alien agent training, and he has to run, and like they've got these cardboard pop-ups and he's shooting them, and he has to be able to tell in a second, is it an alien or is it a little girl or an old lady. um like, if AI can do that for us and prevent a trigger from ever being pulled on somebody who doesn't deserve it getting pulled on them, that would be incredible. But I also know that intimidation and harassment and murder of civilians is a very effective strategy in war. So, what's the goal of the people building the weapons? Is it to win or to do right? Because those are not one to one.
Just to address those two things, autonomous weapons can be very precise and avoid civilian deaths. And I'll talk more about that. But I also
Mm.
want to share a quote I heard. I wish I'd written down who said it, but They said the violence, however, is always inflicted on people. It will always be so because it's pain and suffering that causes the enemy to surrender. So to your point about what is the point of war, and if it is to like get the enemy to surrender, then maybe the makers of these weapons don't care about precision targeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's power, money. Like, that's always been the cause of war.
Yeah.
Adults who forgot to read The Stone Soup.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna share a little bit about like why I use autonomous weapons, and then we're gonna talk a little bit more in depth about like the good, the bad, and the buggy. Okay, so why use autonomous weapons? There are benefits, and I'm going to talk about those in the good. There is this idea of like tech being used inevitably as weapons. That is like in a weird way, like one reason to use them is because um, it's the most effective thing. And this gets us into a conversation about how there's a massive like arms race factor with AI weapons and really any weapon in general, no matter what technology it uses. You might employ AI just because the other side is employing AI, and you kind of need to in order to combat the other side. I think there's also benefits that you're going to find being championed by like AI and tech and like business and the commercial aspect, which is just improve costs, improve scalability, and improve speed. You know, scalability, if you can put in like ground collision defense on all your fighter jets, that's one model that you have to train that then can be applied to all your jets. That's going to save you some money. Speed is a very interesting thing on this topic. And I saw a few instances where people actually referenced like the stock market. And I think we had talked about this at one point, but the modern day stock market awards those who sort of get to the trade first sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And things can be move very fast and move very reactively to like what's going on. And I'm not sure if we talked about it here, but there's even like benefits to having your servers near the actual like trading servers because
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
physically having your wires be like over a shorter distance can award you like faster movement on the trades you want to make.
Yeah, it's literally like tenths of milliseconds
Yeah.
difference. And that just changes, could be the difference of millions of dollars.
Yep. And so people have sort of extended that idea to battle. And if you can have the fastest, most responsive army, whether it be humans or machines, that's a great benefit. And so, one reason you might want to employ AI and automation is because it can get there fast. And it's sort of like if you draw it to its conclusion, some people imagine a world where you would deploy weapons that can only be met by other robot weapons. And so the things that are battling are just robots versus robots, which in a weird way could mean less human casualties. Um,
Mm-hmm. But
yeah.
then
And
it's like
like, yeah.
almost what's the point at that point?
I
Like,
mean,
what are they trying to achieve with
as a
that?
But
fan of Pacific Rim, I would bust out the popcorn and ask when it's syndicated. Let's
Yeah.
go.
And also, Kieran, compare this to the nuclear arms race. There's some evidence to say that we're more protected because everyone has nukes aimed at each other. It's sort of a standoff. And so take this idea to like your AI robot swarm facing off with another AI robot swarm. Neither can like move forward, and then you're just hanging out.
It's just like a stalemate.
I just have this thought of like, those people who play, God, what's StarCraft?
Mm-hmm.
Is that video game?
There's
And they're like
StarCraft and
all
there's
about
Warcraft. Warcraft is like,
StarCraft.
yeah, StarCraft, yeah.
StarCraft players are going to become the military leaders of the future because they're just so fast at deploying their little drones.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
it's going
like
to be like
that movie
esports.
Ender's Game, End of Book. It's
Ender's
like
Game,
movie End of
yeah.
Book. Yeah.
Yeah.
However, both of those examples, there's humans in the loop. Here's the downside of speed is imagine you have because you want to get your weapons out there so fast. You're not waiting for a human to deploy them or give them permission to go. They're just going to go. And then that means the enemies are going to go. And then suddenly you have like a very reactive war. And again, looking at like the stock market, there was a flash crash in 2010 that was basically like
Mm-hmm.
ramping up reactive levels of like selling and trading that brought down the stock market. And so you can imagine like if weapons are totally autonomous and reactive, it could just get blown way out of proportion very quickly.
Yeah, flash crash in warfare
Flash
could
war.
mean end of humanity.
Yeah.
Another one that I think in the US is a big thing that's being worked on is called JAD-C2. I don't know if you saw this in your research, but this is something that, given Primer and we, do a lot of work with government intelligence agencies. This is common knowledge. It's online, so you can search it. It's not proprietary, but joint all domain command and control. This is actually the future that the US government is trying to work towards, where there's sensors and AI in every piece of equipment that now you have this all domain command and control. So today, the different components in the, not just US military, but like broadly in the government systems are very disconnected, surprisingly disconnected. When you think about the government is running the world, like this is the government that runs basically the whole world. And so what they're trying to do is, input or build a system where different components are able to talk to each other. And so it's not just
Mm-hmm.
weapon systems, but also communications, exploration, mining, like all these different components that are part of these, very large government systems. And this is like a big initiative that's being taken on by the US government. And the scale, this is, we've heard from a number of industry experts that this is like by far the largest scale operation that the government is attempting to be able to get to this state. And these experts don't even know how they're going to accomplish it, but they have this vision that all of these different systems, whether it's a fighter jet or it's a satellite comms, or there's like the Space Force, like there's all these different government agencies that they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we connect these things now, because they are so siloed. And one of the big challenges that they face is actually things like security and secrecy, because they are trying to maintain levels of secrecy depending on where they are, but they still want to have these systems be able to talk to each other. So that's just something, I don't know if you saw that, but it's like a little like, adjacent to warfare, but I think probably going to have a large impact when we think about weapon systems having AI.
The other thing that I took a note in my notebook while you were talking, Joe, and I don't know if you'll talk about this, but we're talking a lot about physical war, but
Mm.
I feel like the digital war is what's really heating up, and like propaganda and influence in elections, and like that's all AI.
Mm-hmm.
And
And Joe
arguably,
Biden
like the
telling
more,
people not to vote.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like that might be the more active battleground, actually. I don't know if you were going to go into that in this episode.
I was just gonna mention it really to the degree that you mentioned it, that like
Okay.
technology has opened up a new battlefront, and it's like cyber warfare, and it's not physical, and it includes all the things you mentioned, but also like hacking. Um, I even saw one like opinion on that it could mean less harm to people, because if the battlefield is digital, much like robots battling robots, it means that like yeah, the battle isn't happening in the physical world, and there's maybe benefits to that, but it does mean like yeah, a deeper level of like yeah, monitoring and
It's weird to
safeguarding
me
those.
that, like, I feel like the cyber warfare has externalities and second and third order effects that are
Yeah.
much deadlier than actual warfare. So, for example, if you can manipulate an election and elect somebody who cuts food programs, you can have more hungry children. Like, it's like a third order effect, but if you were going into a war, in a physical war, and saying, I will do something where kids will starve, that's a crime against humanity, and you like, that's really bad. But if you do that in cyber warfare, and it's a second or third order effect because you're promoting bad actors to be elected, or you're influencing culture and society in a certain way,
or taking
that's
down
not regulated.
taking
then
down
the
a
scale could
grid
be
or
much
water
larger.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Well, listeners, why don't you all let us know if you'd like us to do a more in-depth episode on AI and cyber warfare specifically?
Yeah, let us know. Okay, some good things about this, of which there are a few. A lot of autonomous weapon systems are about defense. So, like guarding the sky from missiles coming in. I talked about how US jets are equipped with like automatic ground collision avoidance that has actually saved lives and frankly expensive equipment. So, and a good example of, safeguarding humans in a way that they don't even have to think about it because the machine is thinking about it for them. AI weapons can be far more targeted and more precise, which can be a good thing. I saw a statistic. So, air to ground bombs that had a 50% chance of landing within a half mile of the target during World War II are now accurate within 5 feet.
50% chance? It's like flip a coin and you might hit the target. That's crazy.
Yeah, accurate within 5 feet now.
Wow.
This guidance technology has been instrumental in saving civilian lives. The Human Rights Watch has suggested that using unguided weapons in populated areas be a war crime.
Yeah. That seems like a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like these defense systems could enforce that.
There's also, there's sort of like banning weapons and then there's regulating them. And then to get into that laser tag idea you were talking about, like one idea put forth is build weapons that automatically target weapons, not people.
Oh, that's smart.
I mean,
A
it's
robot
like
that walks around and knocks the gun out of people's hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's in Call of Duty. They have like part of the mission is like take out their weapons system so that they can't attack anymore. And yeah, if you could just take out the weapon system, then there's no more casualties.
There is some benefit potentially to removing human judgment from the equation. And we talked about this. That can be a good or a bad thing. Like, is a methodically well-trained robot going to exact better judgment than a person with like mental issues or someone who's like full of rage and hate who has a weapon? Like, if you can use like AI to detect when the weapon's being used in a way it shouldn't be used, then like you don't let it fire.
And I think it just reminded me of something important, I have to say. Total tangent. Some of the biggest victims of war are soldiers. It is not fun. I've never done it, but I'm sure it's not fun to be a soldier in a war. And maybe some of the harm reduction would be to know I can't accidentally shoot a civilian. My sleep deprivation or panic in a moment won't lead to the death of anyone who's not supposed. Like, that would be a very nice psychological safety net, I think.
I mean, imagine
Yeah.
too, you don't even need to, I mean, this is good and bad, but a soldier doesn't even need to be there. That could actually be bad because it makes killing maybe more casual, but
It's a bit dehumanizing, yeah.
get the human off the battlefield to begin with and let the robots.
But I mean, if neither side has humans on the battlefield and the battlefield is not in a city, but like in a desert, right? But again, it's like it
But I
kind of goes
think-
back to like what are they fighting over at that
Right.
point?
And the only people who have AI, as we talked about, it's just like leading world powers. And it's if they can. I mean, I have this mental model of like all the drones flying over the Middle East are all being operated by like fairly young people in facilities in the United States. For them, it's like playing a video game, and that's dehumanizing. That should not. That doesn't feel right. Like I feel like either both should have bodies on the ground or neither.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know our discussion keeps veering into like making war like
Irrelevant.
not well irrelevant, but also like, oh, how do we make war safe? And it's like that's the opposite of the point in a way. So like I would really defend these safeguards, but yeah, the answer is maybe like don't fight. But if fighting needs to happen, then like yeah, build safeguards to protect civilians or like be effective in your, you know, in your effort.
Mm-hmm. And I think like the other thing that you see throughout history is like war is started by very few people. Like it's not like a whole, country is like we all hate these people and we want to go attack. It's like no, the leader of that country, wants to go start a war. Right? And if you could have AI systems that are keeping leaders in check, that could prevent these wars altogether, right? And have maybe there's like cyber warfare or non-violent things that they could do, or just have a discussion, really. But that's an
Yeah.
ideal world.
And wars fought over power, control, money, resources. If we can use AI to get to post scarcity, we should totally do an episode on post scarcity with AI, Joe.
Definitely.
Then the impetus for war can go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I feel like if leaders were all women, there wouldn't be wars, because I can't think
Hot
of
take.
the time
Hot
that
take.
women had ever
Yeah,
started
it's
a
not.
war.
Listen, I mean, there is some history. Wars get started because of women. Shout out Helen of Troy, you great beauty. Faced to launch 1,000 ships. But
Mythological.
if anybody was on the internet in like circa December or January, some senator, I don't know, some geezer made a comment of like we should draft women, and somebody put it on TikTok, and like a bajillion women responded with hilarious jokes of how like, yeah, send us, it'll be funny. Nothing will get done, but it'll be really entertaining and good. Like, do we wear our standing up jeans or do we wear our sitting down jeans? Whose mom is dropping us off? What's the parking situation? Let's go. Like, so yeah, I do believe that the patriarchy, but in general, all the bad things, right? Sexism, racism, classism, xenophobia, like all of those things contribute to impetus and motivation for war.
Mm-hmm.
I do think we
and
keep
robots can be trained out of some of that stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna hold myself accountable for not derailing you, Joe, because as I'm thinking about this, like there is the technology, like the can it be done, and there's a lot possible in warfare and weapons with AI. Then there's the should it be done, which is a totally different thing. And then can we action the right actions?
Yeah.
Like, can anybody really influence what's going to happen? And I think those three are separate problems. And only one of them is in the domain of AI, which is can it be done?
Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, I think that's actually the easiest problem to solve.
Yeah, like Karen, when you were talking about like the government's vision for this, I was like, well, it's possible because yeah, we have the technology to put sensors in everything and make it all talk to each other.
Yeah,
But
it's like the AI itself is actually not very complicated in most of these cases. It's the systems around that and the organization and the human parts of it that make it really complicated.
yeah, to the level even of like politics and like geopolitical possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a few more things just on the good. We talked about nonviolent warfare, like cyber warfare. There could be some benefits to that, removing actual battlefields, but as Andy said, might not actually be benefits. We talked about robots fighting robots and how that could mean like people not involved. There's some possible good for that, some possible bad
And
as
to be
well.
clear, I don't need that to come from war. I would happily just have international battle bots leagues. I think it would be really cool.
Yeah, why not? I mean, we have that. And isn't there a TV show just like BattleBots or
Yeah,
something?
but it's like home stuff. I want to see like major military industrial complex powers building
Love it.
giant Jaegers. That's what I want.
Jaegers.
Yes.
This is I don't know if it's specifically a good, but how a lot of autonomous weapons are being used right now. And I saw a lot of cases where it's actually surveillance and not weapons, but going into places where there's no connectivity or bandwidth. So that is a benefit of autonomy, is that you can go places where humans can't maybe get a signal to control the weapon, like enemy territory, or can go into spaces where like other types of communication are jammed, something like that.
I have an idea for a good to add that I know is something that's being worked on because a buddy of mine does it. Shout out to Justin. I need to send you a letter back for your letter thanking me for not getting you a wedding gift. But anyway, the they're making little robots, little like beep boop, tiny ones. His is based off of Lemur. He's on a government military contract in his postdoc, and it's got computer vision on it, and it's really small so that it can like find people in rubble, and it's disaster response, but it's also like humanitarian response in the context of the military, because there's places where like even like rescue dogs or trained rats can't go, and you can put a little camera on this little thing. He calls it Salto, and it like bing 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 bings, parkours and finds people, and it can deliver messages, tell them to hold on, pinpoint their location. Just a really cool application of
Very cool.
robotics / AI.
We should do an episode on disaster AI and disaster relief.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What a wonderful
Do you
application
remember
of AI.
when we'll talk about that, but remember when we were doing the crowdsourcing project for finding that plane?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I love crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
We should do an episode on AI and crowdsourcing. Okay, let's talk about the bad. We've covered a lot of this stuff. There's the threat that killing becomes more casual. Like, if you don't have human empathy involved, then does it make killing more like thoughtless or like, yeah, casual? That's not great. We want AI weapons to make smarter, more effective decisions if they must exist. Like all AI, autonomous weapons can be unexplainable. They can be black boxes. We don't always know how it works. And in warfare, people tend to use what works, even if they don't understand it. So AI is perfect for that. But it means, yeah, something bad may happen and we may not know why. Why did something make the decision that it did? We can't really learn if we don't understand it.
And I think
And to
another
be
question that comes out of that is like, then who is responsible for
Yep.
that? I mean, it's the same thing with like autonomous vehicles, right? Like, who's responsible for the accident? Is it Elon Musk? Is it the driver? Is it the car? Like, yeah.
Is it the coder? Yeah. It's a great question. And a super important one for weapons. Their warfare is obviously complicated, and it means complicated training of these weapons. And I saw one good example is for autonomous weapons, you probably need it to understand certain things like surrender. Like, it can target soldiers, and its directive might be take out all the soldiers. But what if those soldiers start surrendering? Will the AI be able to recognize that intention? So it's a little bit more complicated than just like find an attack. And then this is also one that is just like overall AI, but can we guarantee that we can control an autonomous weapon just like any piece of machinery that is an AI mind, and maybe even like AI that becomes like AGI, what is AGI? Artificial general intelligence, meaning
Hmm.
it becomes smarter than humans or can do all this stuff. There's always this fear that it goes out of control, and because it's such a powerful weapon, like, will it be easy to stop? Because maybe there isn't another weapon that can take it out, or like humans without like having that intelligence or um, being a weapon themselves can't stop it. There's always that fear with AI that it could go like rogue or become too powerful. Um,
Hmm.
Scary stuff. That's probably the
Yeah.
scariest thing about from the research I found.
And then there's the whole like, okay, well, the the humans are trying to turn off the AI because it's gone rogue, and now it thinks that it's the humans that created it are, you know, a threat because they're trying to decommission this AI. Right? It
Yeah.
becomes this like apocalyptic, like crazy sci-fi movie, but like we're going there.
Also, the accessibility of this technology, like it doesn't take, and this is really with any weapon, it doesn't always take a superpower who has like principles in place or regulation to build a smart weapon. Like you can have some crazy evil rogue mad scientist actor out there who can build something simple that goes on a rampage potentially. I mean, there's no evidence of that yet, but it's always kind of like on our minds when we think about AI and robots, frankly.
Hmm.
Okay, the buggy. Um, there have been accidents. So a common theme from this podcast is that like before you hit the good or the bad, you have to take out all the bugs, and like the autonomous weapons that we have had in the past have there have been accidents. I read about a couple, but just to give you one, I believe it was in 2003. Basically, there was a system like missile defense system that was set to shoot down anything that shouldn't be in the airspace. It was a US missile defense system. Two UK uh, air fighters entered the space, and that they're friends, like they should not be shot at. And the system first did not recognize that they were not the enemies, so that was a failure of the AI. And then there was a human intervention safeguard that the humans who were watching the system didn't stop it or interrupt it. I don't exactly know why, but like essentially they weren't watching, and then it went through, and those UK fighter pilots died. There haven't been so many accidents that it's like, I don't know. It's kind of like self-driving. How do I say this? Like maybe an accident every once in a while is necessary to teach us to like learn from, as long as like they're super super limited. Um, Particularly when you compare it to how many accidents or like friendly fire happen when just humans are involved and not machines. Like I'm talking big picture. This is an accident, but it's a more rare accident because a machine is involved.
I mean, a big friendly fire, civilian fire, not really friendly fire, but like, after we killed Soleimani, they wanted to launch missiles against US or whoever, and ended up hitting a commercial airliner
Yeah,
and killed everyone on the flight.
yeah, I read about
And
that.
that effectively like ended that crisis. But unfortunately, like hundreds of people had to die.
Hmm. Um,
I'm reading something right now that I'd heard about. So, for context, Kieran works at a company called Primer. I used to work there as well. Primer does a lot of work with the government. All three of us worked with Figure Eight, and we worked on government military projects. There was a women's event at Primer one time. So Kieran, you weren't there, and we were talking to a U.S. Air Force general, and it came up in conversation. I'm looking it up right now. The Kunduz hospital airstrike. So on the 3rd of October, 2015, the United States Air Force accidentally dropped bombs on a hospital in northern Afghanistan. 42 people died, 30 were injured. Doctors Without Borders called it a deliberate breach of international humanitarian law and a war crime. And I'm looking at what caused the mistargeting, because they were told precisely where the location of the hospital was. And I believe it was a drone that deployed the...
Yeah, I think in all these cases, the question is, again, getting back to that intelligence and freedom of the weapon, was it the failure of AI, or was it the failure of humans, or the failure of both of them working together? Like, who got it wrong? And it's worth asking with autonomous weapons, because I think there's cases where it actually wasn't really the machine or the automation. It was like the human who's responsible for that automation very clearly, or for like being the human in the loop.
And my guess is like this might actually be the messiest phase, where we're trying to figure out how humans and machines should be working together. And there's just like such a different level of fidelity, interaction, speed, like all those things you mentioned between a machine and a human, that I think this is where it's going to be really challenging. I think when it's like all humans, right, there's just not the speed that a machine has. And so you have maybe more time for humans to react versus, right now there's this discrepancy. And then when it's fully autonomous, then the machines can be regulating the machines and kind of keep up with each other. I don't know, maybe.
And I found the line from the general in Afghanistan that I think highlights the risks here of what happened. So this was in November. General John F. Campbell, the American commander in Afghanistan, commander, not general, he said that the situation was the direct result of avoidable human error compounded by process and equipment failures. So, ... Campbell said electronic equipment malfunctions on the gunship prevented it from accessing email and images, while a navigation error meant its targeting equipment also misidentified the target buildings. The internal report states that the aircraft fired 211 shells at the building in 29 minutes before American commanders realized the mistake and ordered the attack to stop.
30 minutes before they responded to this?
211 shells. And to be clear, the gunship was supposed to be accessing email, images, navigation, and targeting. There's certainly some AI that was involved in that.
That's the JADC2.
And there's some she said, they said of like Medicine Sans Frontiers, Doctors Without Borders has a logo that they stick on all these buildings, and you're not supposed to do war around these logos, and not clear whether the cameras were seeing the logo, if the logo was, like there's just a lot.
So many different factors
happening there. But yeah, the speed of it, 211 shells in 29 minutes before the human on the loop, which I think is what you described, Joe. Somebody should have been monitoring what it was doing, caught on that it was going wild.
This is something I saw in a few places. This human on the loop is fraught, because I think humans, it sounds nice in theory, but I think humans rest a little bit because they know that, like, in most cases the AI will do a good job, so they don't really watch, they don't really monitor. But if you have to be very present and be watching this thing, it might be easier to relax if nothing ever seems to happen until it does happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. Like, you see the videos of people falling asleep behind the wheel of their Tesla. It's like, you need to
Yep,
be
that's
watching the
exactly where my
road.
mind went.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or if you have to watch like 6 screens of 6 of these, you might be preoccupied with one and then miss what the other one's doing. Like,
And that's where I think that like human computer interface is going to be really a challenge, because humans aren't used to like doing something like that or having like their attention in so many places. But now we're saying like we can scale this out so one human can manage like 5 battlefields, but it's like humans have
Can
never
you?
done that, you
Yeah.
know?
so we have to make like Ender's Game and take the TikTok iPad kids and send them to space and make their brains look at 200 things at once.
Yeah. Oh,
Interesting.
man.
Sci-fi is wild. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
Ender's
and to be
Game
very
is
clear,
basically talking
I
about this.
I'm very much kidding. Do not militarize children.
Yeah.
It's not
I
good
mean,
what we're doing to their
unfortunately,
brains with
it
attention.
happens in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is excuse me, my last section. And it's just a little bit on like cutting edge modern warfare, largely due to the war in Ukraine. Right now, the proving ground for the next generation of this technology is underway. Like Ukraine is very much, it is a new world of automation and robots and using technology in battle. So throughout the Ukraine war, like drones have played a really big role. I read a lot, not necessarily about them fighting, but doing surveillance. I think I mentioned this earlier, but Wired had an interesting article on how like drone startups used for agriculture pivoted to basically turn into surveillance or like wartime drones. And this was more in the beginning of the war, but actually now like even more autonomous weapons and surveillance robots are popping up in the war, and not even in the air now, but on the ground. There's like a lot of evidence of both sides sort of deploying like robo tanks and um, yeah, all sorts of like machines. And Wired also had a very interesting article on how like Ukraine is actually able to profit a little bit off of their battleground data, because um, this is a little bit of a gold rush as an industry to go and supply the war effort, which is awful. But like there is suddenly a new market to create weapons and use technology and autonomy. And to train good AI and good machine learning, you have to have good like data and training data and data that reflects the real world scenario. And there are so few battlefields in the world that you can sort of look at Ukraine and say, like, we want to get in there and understand how to build good weapons and then sell them to you. And my understanding is Ukraine is actually like limiting who gets to access their data because they're using it as leverage. And like it's actually a way for them to provide value, which is just insane. I think between this and the obvious ramp up of like the US DoD and other big governments just ramping up on AI and technology, like it's a very interesting time right now where we are pivoting and beginning to look very seriously at using AI in war, um, in a way we never have before, for better or worse. Uh,
Mhm.
I think like it's the stuff of a lot of sci-fi in the past that's becoming true. And that's it.
Wow.
That's
Oh
all
my
the
goodness.
research.
Um, I don't like war.
Yeah.
I think it's stupid.
I agree.
I've yet to hear a good argument for it. And I say that having worked at 2 startups doing work with the military on this stuff. Still waiting to hear a good argument for it.
Mm.
Hmm. I mean, the only argument for it is to defend the people that are getting attacked. But to initiate any sort of war or like any sort of violence, it's just so unfortunate that we still resort to that, millennia after humans have had, communication and ways of interacting beyond violence.
When we figured out ways to cooperate, like even through capitalism and globalization, it's benefited so many more people than war. Like, it's so silly. It's such a waste of time and energy if you have a specific, like, if your only goal is to hurt people. Yeah, war is great. But if you like, so many other things are better, faster, easier, cheaper through collaboration and just problem solving.
Yeah, it's like if Russia wanted the resources in Ukraine, instead of spending all the money they've probably spent on a war, and they spent that on those resources, like, they probably would have resolved whatever they need. But it's like the whim of one person now just impacting literally millions of people.
Well, maybe AI will do some good.
Yes. Yeah, I actually feel oddly hopeful of AI improving the landscape in warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
This is how I feel after every episode. Is like, look at what it can do. Oh no, it's not doing it. It's doing something bad.
yeah.
And this
we
is
just need
like
more
a
good
high
actors.
stakes scenario where that's like more important than ever.
Mm-hmm. So, folks, that was our episode on AI and warfare. I think we heard a lot of very interesting use cases. Um, you know, nice to hear that there's good things going on and possible futures where AI is actually making warfare safer for humans. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, and this AI could do a lot of harm if used in the wrong way. And I think this, in every case of AI, which we've mentioned in probably every single episode, like the people developing this have a lot of power. And so how do we regulate the systems around the development of these different types of AI, and regulate the execution and deployment of this AI, especially in warfare, so that we can, ultimately get to a safer place. I know we also raised a lot of questions which we didn't answer, and I think that's just part of this being such a new landscape and field. It was also interesting to hear that smart mines, as potentially the first type of autonomous weapon, dates back to 1600s or even earlier. And I think, again, it just kind of goes to technologies that humans are constantly iterating on, and how it's impacting our society, our culture. So lots of questions. I'm sure we're going to get back into this at a future episode. Let us know if you guys would like to hear anything, if you want us to expand on anything. And in the meantime, like, subscribe, check us out on your favorite podcasting platform, and we'll be back with another one very soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.